The reservation was supposed to be cancelled 10 minutes earlier, but his thumb hovered over the screen as rain hammered against the windshield and his 6-year-old daughter cried softly in the backseat, half asleep and clutching the stuffed rabbit her mother had bought her before cancer took her 3 winters ago. He had stared at the restaurant's glowing sign through the storm, feeling that familiar ache settle into his chest, the ache of trying to move forward while part of him still lived in hospital hallways and whispered goodbyes. Then he saw her, alone in the downpour, stranded beside a dark sedan with her wheelchair half collapsed in a widening puddle, her face tilted downward as headlights rushed past without slowing. For a moment, he almost drove away. His date was already a mistake he regretted agreeing to. His daughter was tired, his own life felt held together by threads. But something about the quiet way she sat there, refusing to wave for help, refusing to beg the world for kindness, made him pull over. Before we continue, if you believe every story hides a lesson waiting to be discovered, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Stories, because sometimes the smallest moments change everything. Ethan Mercer had spent the last 4 years becoming an expert at surviving one day at a time. At 37, his face carried the exhaustion of a man who had aged too quickly. There were faint lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before Claire died. His broad shoulders still held strength, but grief had reshaped the way he carried himself, as though some invisible weight pressed constantly against him. Since losing his wife, his world had narrowed to school drop-offs, packed lunches, late-night laundry, and whispered reassurances to his daughter Lily whenever she woke from nightmares asking for her mother. Friends had urged him to date again. They'd insisted he deserved happiness, that Claire would have wanted him to move on. Eventually, after months of polite refusals, he'd agreed to let his sister set up a blind date. He regretted it almost instantly. The woman waiting in the rain looked to be in her early 30s, her dark hair plastered against her cheeks, her burgundy dress damp at the hem where it brushed the wet pavement. The wheelchair beside her leaned awkwardly, one wheel twisted at an unnatural angle. She wasn't crying or panicking. She simply sat there with her hands folded tightly in her lap, staring into the storm with the kind of practiced stillness people develop when they've learned that asking for help often leads nowhere. Ethan parked and stepped into the rain before he could second-guess himself. Cold water soaked through his jacket immediately as he crossed the lot. Up close, he saw the tension in her jaw and the way her fingers trembled despite her calm expression. Without asking questions, he crouched beside the damaged chair and assessed the bent axle. It wasn't fixable there. The wheel had locked. Her ride was gone too, battery dead, engine silent. He offered to help her inside. At first she hesitated, not because she doubted him, but because accepting help often came with humiliation attached. Ethan could see that in her eyes, the reflexive caution of someone used to pity disguised as kindness. But then Lily leaned out from the backseat window, her curls messy from sleep, and offered the woman her rabbit with solemn seriousness, as if lending a stuffed animal might solve everything. That tiny gesture made the woman smile. And in that smile, something shifted. Ethan carefully lifted her into the spare wheelchair the restaurant kept for emergencies after convincing the manager to retrieve it from storage. He carried her with surprising gentleness, conscious of how light she felt, how rigidly she held herself as though bracing for awkwardness. Instead, he moved with the steady confidence of someone who had spent years caring for another human being. He settled her into the chair and rolled her beneath the restaurant's warm amber lights. Inside, the contrast was striking. Outside, the storm raged with violent insistence. Inside, everything glowed gold, polished wood, flickering candles, soft jazz drifting through hidden speakers, the scent of rosemary and fresh bread filling the air. Diners laughed over wine glasses. Servers moved gracefully between tables. It was the kind of place designed for beginnings. Ethan checked his phone. 3 missed notifications from his sister asking if he'd arrived. 1 message from the dating app confirming his reservation for 2 under his name. And another from the mystery woman he was supposed to meet, sent 20 minutes earlier. Running late. Wheelchair trouble. Please don't leave. His stomach dropped. He stared at the message, then slowly looked up at the woman sitting before him. She was already staring at her own phone, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to something softer, almost amused. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Her name was Amelia. She was 33, a former architectural designer whose life had changed in an instant 2 years earlier when a drunk driver ran a red light and crushed the driver's side of her car. The accident left her partially paralyzed from the waist down. Before that night, she had been engaged, successful, planning a future full of movement and possibility. Within months, her fiancé had quietly unraveled under the pressure and left, telling her through tears that he couldn't do this life. Ethan learned all this slowly over dinner. Because neither of them knew how to leave. Canceling now would have been absurd. Staying felt surreal. So they sat. At first, the conversation was cautious, almost clinical. The kind strangers make when they're both painfully aware of circumstance. But then Lily, now fully awake and seated between them with fries she'd somehow charmed from the kitchen, began asking Amelia earnest 6-year-old questions. Did wheelchairs go fast? Could they do races? Did she like cartoons? Had she ever eaten 20 chicken nuggets at once? Amelia laughed, a full, unguarded laugh that made nearby diners glance over and smile. And Ethan saw something he hadn't expected. Joy, not the forced kind people manufacture for politeness, but the real kind. Bright and sudden and impossible to fake. As the evening deepened, walls came down. Ethan spoke about Claire for the first time on a date, describing her fierce humor, the way she sang terribly in the kitchen, the way illness had reduced her body but never her spirit. Amelia listened without discomfort or impatience. She didn't rush him past the grief. She let it exist. In turn, she told him what paralysis had stolen from her, not just movement, but spontaneity, identity, confidence. She admitted she'd nearly cancelled tonight because blind dates often ended the moment men saw the chair. Ethan looked at her then, really looked at her. At the intelligence in her dark eyes, the strength hidden beneath her vulnerability, the grace with which she carried pain she never asked for. And he realized he had almost cancelled too. Not because of her, because he'd convinced himself life after loss could only be obligation. When the restaurant began closing, the storm had softened to a light drizzle. Ethan insisted on driving Amelia home. The ride was quiet, but not awkward. Lily had fallen asleep against Amelia's arm, trusting her completely. Streetlights slid across the windshield in long golden streaks. The city looked softened somehow, gentler. At Amelia's apartment building, Ethan helped her to the door. There, beneath the pale porch light, they paused. Neither reached for easy promises. Neither pretended this was destiny wrapped neatly in coincidence. Life had already taught them both that real things were rarely neat. But there was something undeniable in that moment, the quiet recognition of two people who had both been broken open by life and somehow still found themselves capable of connection. Weeks turned into months. Their relationship unfolded slowly. There were setbacks, fear, misunderstandings, nights when Ethan wondered if loving again betrayed Claire. Days when Amelia doubted she could ever be enough for someone with a child and a history she could never replace. But love, when real, doesn't arrive like fireworks. It arrives like dawn, quietly, steadily, until suddenly the darkness is gone. Amelia became part of their world not by replacing what had been lost, but by creating something new. She taught Lily how to paint skylines from memory. Ethan built ramps and rearranged furniture without being asked. Together they learned each other's scars. And 1 year later, on the anniversary of that stormy night, Ethan returned to the same restaurant. This time there was no blind date. No hesitation. No cancellation text waiting unsent. Only certainty. As he knelt beside Amelia's wheelchair beneath the same amber lights, with Lily grinning nearby and diners watching in breathless silence, he understood something he'd spent years resisting. Life doesn't always give second chances wrapped the way we expect. Sometimes they arrive stranded in the rain. If this story touched your heart, comment, kindness changes everything, right now before the ending. And if this story made you feel something real, hope, sadness, healing, or belief in unexpected beginnings, please like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Stories so more people can experience moments like this. Because sometimes the date you almost cancel becomes the reason you believe in tomorrow again.